We're joined today by Margaret Weichert, who is the Deputy for Management at OMB. Margaret, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Kicking right off, the President's Management Agenda that rolled out a few months ago, and you went out to Kansas City to get out of Washington and see the rest of the country and the rest of the federal workforce. That management agenda, while it was focused on the workforce, it was also very heavily technical. It had a lot of technology in there, a lot of IT pushes. What does IT have to do with management?
Great question. So when we rolled out the President's Management Agenda and kicked it off in Kansas City, it was really part of a broad set of listening activities we've been doing to really understand what were the challenges for this government meeting the mission, service, and stewardship obligations in the 21st century. And it really boiled down to, when we talked to farmers and veterans and federal employees and legislators and state and local governments, there were three key areas that were critical barriers to progress on an agenda for modernization. And they were IT modernization, data accountability and transparency, and people and workforce issues. And what we really found is there were threads around all three of those things that worked in concert to make it really difficult to make change happen. And so our focus was, how do we think about all three of those things together? So not modernizing IT in a vacuum, but really understanding, okay, what are the data elements that are associated with that technology, and who are the people who are affected by technology who use it to serve citizens, or may be blocked from helping citizens because of the technology tools that either they don't have, or just the challenges of having to work with multiple legacy systems.
So as OMB and all this whole of government effort comes to fruition, what are these technology pushes going to mean for the federal workforce, both those working in IT and out of it?
So I think that the key thing to take into account is we need to balance all of the activities around the mission, the services we provide to customers, and stewardship of the taxpayer resources. So it's not about one thing or another. It's about solving a simultaneous equation around all three elements. And what we see when we look at many good IT projects is we choose not to do them because we're fearful for attacking, what are the root causes associated with that. There are a lot of complexities in terms of how does the workforce move around, how can we put them to the best use. And yet we see there are about as many jobs that we can't fill as the ones that we think might be improved through automation and technology improvements. So we really need to unlock agility and the ability to move people around. In the private sector, people don't stay in the same jobs and do only one thing for their whole careers. The notion of the gig economy is precisely about what's the project that someone's working on today. We need to be more like the private sector in that regard and learn how to continuously learn and have our workforce do that as well.
So how do we get there? What's in the President's Management Agenda and beyond that can make those changes happen?
So I think it's a great question, and what we wanted to do was look around government and see where were there some efforts already in place, look at places where we had challenges in terms of getting the funding, getting the focus, and really accelerate those. So movement to cloud, I think, is a great example. It's not a new concept. People know that cloud does a lot of things for us in terms of efficiency, cost management, automation. It also helps us with a lot of our cyber goals. But moving to cloud is complicated. It involves often many different authorities, different procurement challenges. And so what we've done is we've looked at examples like the Department of Justice and the FBI migration, the Air Force migration, looked at key practices from those. We've worked with the General Services Administration to say, how do we kind of create centers of excellence around cloud migration? And then in our organization, the Office of the Federal CIO is really looking at how do we package and repeatably implement these activities and do it in a way where we can use new funding capabilities like those that were delivered in the MGT Act and the Technology Modernization Fund to help really create the financing that's going to result in good investments, but might have a payback that looks a little different. And so working with all of those pillars, we think we can actually make a big difference in getting traction.
Excellent. Talking again about some of the workforce issues revolving around technology, the Federal Workplace Priorities Report, which is an addendum to the PMA through OPM, just came out recently. It mentions that automation could cut the workload for 60% of the federal workforce by 30%. What kind of automation tools and processes are we talking about there?
So I think a lot of folks know the government is kind of almost staggering under the weight of all the paper that we have. And I think we also all have examples when we interact with government that we see, oh, there's a paper form that comes in over here and then is digitally entered over there, or there is something that digitally arrives in a form here and then gets printed out and then imaged or scanned somewhere else. A lot of errors can be introduced that way. And it's not value added. I think there's a great example. Our U.S. Digital Service folks did some work with the Small Business Administration where they basically were able to use online forms and some process automation to actually streamline the work around getting small businesses funding after disasters.
When time is of the essence.
So rather than destroying jobs, it actually is improving our service levels to customers and enabling those same SBA employees to better serve them more quickly, get through the backlog, and get community leaders and small business owners the funding that they need to re-energize their community. So I think that's a great example, but business process automation, appropriate use of software, robots, these are all things that can help with that parts of a job that are error-prone and paper-intensive, kind of go through that.
Excellent. The report also mentions, though, that automation could eliminate another 5% of federal jobs entirely. What kind of jobs are we talking about there? What kind of processes?
So I'm not familiar with the details of that particular data element. What I can say is there are a very small handful of jobs that are going to be displaced as we go to kind of digitally native activities. So to the extent that a job is exclusively about moving paper from one place to another, that is not necessarily something that is going to have long-term legs. It certainly doesn't in the private sector. I think most folks understand in the public sector that should be no different. But again, I'll bring back to the point is we have any number of new type jobs that are being created around data, around cyber, around even things like law enforcement that we struggle to fill. And if we've got a dedicated workforce who have passed our background checks, who want to be of service to their country, we need to figure out how do we have the agility to reskill employees, redeploy them, move folks around so that they have skills that are aligned to the 21st century mission.
One of the other things, staying on workforce for a moment, that the administration has been talking about to help facilitate that and to bring people in, particularly from the technology fields, is pay for performance. Congress didn't include the $1 billion pilot program this year, but what is the administration's plan going forward? How are you looking to implement pay for performance generally?
So I think I appreciate you mentioning that particular workforce fund request. As Director Mulvaney mentioned on the Hill when he talked about our budget request, we would very much like to see Congress fund that in 2019. The $1 billion would be essentially creating the capacity to look at the roles and the jobs and the critical capabilities we need for the 21st century and line up performance-oriented pay, innovative programs to attract, retain, and reward the best talent, and line that up with the market priorities. Hiring cyber talent, hiring data scientists is not only hard for government. It's a war for talent across industry. we need to have flexibilities and tools, including this $1 billion workforce fund, to help really get the people, whether they're outside of government or reskill the people inside of government to meet the needs of the 21st century.
Without a central fund to run pilot programs, is there anything you can do within the next year to get that started?
Well, we're definitely working with all of the councils on how they use existing funds around retention and recruiting to be really thoughtful around linking to critical jobs. We're looking very specifically around the cyber workforce and a number of activities working with Department of Homeland Security, with NSC, and others who are focused on hiring in that particular pool. And there are a number of activities in the workforce cross-agency priority goal area where leaders like Jay Gibson from the Department of Defense, Dr. Pond from OPM, and folks from Department of Homeland Security are working with our team to really unpack, what are all the channels we can use and the capabilities that we can unlock that already exist.
Excellent. Getting back to the IT modernization part of all this, modernization was also a big push from the last administration. MGT started before 45 came in. But just last week on tax day, we had some troubles with some IRS systems. Census is having trouble getting their tech ready in time for the 2020 count. The government still spends 80% of its IT budget on operations and management, while agencies continue to slip on things like the FITARA scorecard. This isn't a new topic. What's the new tack that this administration is going to take to make change happen?
So I think it's a great question, and it's one that I am absolutely grateful for the work that has gone before to line us up for really making progress in this administration. So the work to get to the MGT Act that allows the working capital funds, that allows us to invest differently, the actual funding of the Technology Modernization Fund. $100 million is a great start. It's not all the money we need, but what it is going to help us do is showcase how do we invest in multi-year projects that have real return for taxpayers and give people the courage to continue to invest where they need to. I think the other thing that's really different is we're pulling together across not only agencies, which has been done before, but across functions and across capabilities. And we're looking at root causes like funding. We're looking at root causes like the legislative agenda, so building on what we've done with MGT. And so really creating a holistic approach and a center of gravity. And then the last thing is assigning agency leaders, and in some cases more than one agency leader, to really provide a leading light around how we dig in and get this done. I think that orientation and the folks we've got lined up are being held accountable, are committed to delivering. Secretary Perdue at USDA is signed up. Deputy Secretary Sensky is signed up for leading the charge around IT modernization. We've got folks from GSA Centers of Excellence deeply involved. We've got folks from OMB in the Office of the Federal CIO deeply involved in communities outside of Kansas City, talking to the farmers, getting traction. The U.S. Digital Service is part of this. So we're really providing focus, and I think what the President's management agenda and even launching it outside of Washington does is it shines a light on the areas where we are really focused. We're focused not on esoteric, boil the ocean, modernize IT for its own sake. We're talking about modernizing for specific use cases, whether it's small businesses, farmers, veterans. We are taking seriously the journeys that these customers are going on and working with the agency leaders to really make it happen.
And when you say identifying people at agencies who can be leaders of this, are you looking at just the top line leadership? Are you looking to CIOs? Who are the people that you're looking to lead on this?
So, great question. We are looking to cascade this all the way into the field. So again, there was symbolism, but also practicality to our trip to Kansas City. So we went to the USDA offices. We met with all the regional executives, and we met with a group of farmers. And GSA led the interactive listening session with the farmers and all of the frontline managers who work with those same farmers to talk about what are our thoughts. And a really great example is we didn't go in with a specific agenda about what we expected to talk about around IT modernization. But we have some ideas. We're thinking about shared services. We're thinking about cloud. We're thinking about user experience. They wanted to talk about two things, the farmers did. They wanted to talk about the fact that they are LLCs and we treat them as individuals. That's not purely an IT activity, but it has profound implications for how you design that end-to-end process and hardwire it into technology. If you don't understand, oh wait, we treat these people as individuals and they're businesses, that's a problem. The other one was a really fun one where they talked about our, $100,000 tractors are equipped with GPS. We know precisely how much acreage we have planted, but paper-based USDA maps don't match what USDA or what GPS signals from their tractors are saying. And so sometimes farmers are overpaying for crop insurance. That's the kind of thing you get when you really cascade from the top all the way down to the field of what's important to the farmer isn't always what I thought it was. And we have to solve the big picture and the tactical.
Excellent. So from the CIO perspective, from the IT shops at agencies who are trying to solve these very issues but are dealing with massive legacy IT systems and small budgets, assuming that as a CIO, I've mapped all of my agency needs. I know what systems I have, what are legacy, what are in the process of being updated, what are newer. I have ideas to fix the problems that I've identified, and I want to fix them, right? And we've got leadership buy-in, we've got congressional buy-in, we've got the administration buying in. What's next? Where do I start?
So I think there are a number of ways to start. I think to the extent that the folks have set up the working capital funds under the MGT authorities, the place in a lot of cases is to start with a conversation between the CIO and the CFO and really look at how do I pay for what I'm doing? What are my business cases? How do I really think about funding my activities and getting investment around those activities? And what are my priorities in terms of execution? I think pulling in a broader set of folks around, if I need to apply for TMF funding using the Technology Modernization Fund, who do I need from within my agency or potentially with other agencies to come up with the proposals I need there. In some cases, they may want to reach out to the centers of excellence that have been stood up at GSA. Our team at OMB can certainly help guide people. Folks at USDS, the U.S. Digital Service, can help. So what I would suggest, to anyone who is thinking about, not knowing where to start, first pull up within the cross-functional teams within a specific agency, but also connect with your counterparts in some of the other councils, the CXO councils. And we're absolutely open in OMB to having these conversations to help folks get started.
Excellent. So with the management agenda out, there's addendums coming out, but it's been very well read and everybody knows what's there and what you're trying to do. What's next? Looking forward, what are the continuing iterations that are going to be rolling out in the next few months, and what's next year's PMA going to look like?
So the President's Management Agenda is essentially the administration's perspective on the vision for change over that administration. So there won't be another PMA next year. What there will be is every quarter progress on the cross-agency priority goals that will be linked to our performance.gov website. That will be the primary place where we report out on that. And there'll be new cross-agency priority goals added as appropriate coming out of the President's Management Council and other cross-agency councils. The really more important answer to your question, though, is how do we translate the messages and the priorities and the area of focus through the agency is largely a communications activity and a connecting of dots activity. So a lot of what I'm going to be spending time on is continuing to talk to folks throughout government, throughout communities, and really the broader good government community, the private sector, academic institutions who might have a stake in how government moves forward with this change. The more people are invested in this change actually happening, and there are multiple voices pushing in the same direction and carrying water in the same direction, the more likely we are to be successful. I think our sense is this isn't a task for central federal government alone. This is a task for like-minded Americans from all sectors to work together towards common goals. And I think we've had a great reception outside of government around how do we do this. So I want to see the private sector carrying water on this front. I want to see state and local governments informing us of where they have great case studies on how to move forward. I think tactically we're looking at continuing to work with Congress on any legislative enhancements that we need to unstick other barriers to enable more flexibilities, for example, around the people agenda, so we can move people across government more fluidly. We're looking probably a lot on the data agenda to look at standards and really building out on TBM and some of the other methodologies that help us move forward. And then continuing to really reach out to folks who care about this agenda and get their input about what's next.
Can you give us any preview of some of the congressional pushes in particular that you'd be interested in?
So I think the biggest areas where we need to ultimately continue to discuss, there's a lot of things around, what are the future iterations of many legacy statutory authorities in the workforce space. So I think we all know it's been about 40 years since there's been major civil service reform, and I think in the President's State of the Union address and in other forums we've talked a lot about areas where we need to evolve from something that was utterly relevant and on point in 1978 to a digital workforce and a workforce that's characterized by Moore's law and things moving at the speed of computing, not at the speed of paper. So that's probably the biggest area, but I would definitely see a number of things around data and how we think about data. Computer Matching Act is an area where there's a lot of things that we're looking at around the do not pay capabilities that deal with improper payments. How do we help extend the ability within government and even to state and local governments to prevent bad payments before they happen? So I think that's another area where we'd be looking for more work.
Excellent. Well, we'll be following all of that closely, and members of the public who are interested in following all your efforts, they can find you on Twitter, right?
That's right.
Weichert45?
Yep, that's correct.
Excellent. We know you've been active there, so I'm sure you'll have a whole bunch of new followers interested in what's going on. Anything else you wanted to add about the IT modernization efforts coming out of this administration?
I think the key thing that I'd love to share is that IT modernization is something that benefits not just government and the citizens that are serving it directly, but it's critical to the economic growth of our economy. We lead the world in technology development, and historically government's been right at the heart of that engine for growth and change. We need to get back to that place where we are leading examples as the largest employer in the U.S. economy, that we are exemplars of what's great about American technology, that we are not laggards. So that's probably the biggest point I'd like to end with.
Excellent. Margaret Weichert, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.